welcome everybody. I'm proud to be joined today by the National Federation of Croatian Americans President, Steve Rukavina. My name is Ryan Sherba. I am the founding editor of Balkan Insider, which is a Monday to Thursday morning newsletter about the what's going on in the Balkans and in Southeast Europe. We like to focus on pretty much anywhere you go, and especially, it's been great getting to know Steve over the past few years. So Steve, can you just explain what is NFCA? Why did it come about? What's the goals? What are some of your keystone projects?
Okay, Dober Doshli, and thanks Ryan and Ari Middleman for hosting these fireside chats. The National Federation of Croatian Americans was created in 1993, so we're in our 28th year, and we organized that national umbrella group. With our first convention in 1994, we had 31 groups from all over the country that came, and as we all know, there was a lot going on in the Southeastern Europe region, and with Croatia trying to build and protect its democracy. So as a national umbrella group, we have a lot of regional and some other national groups and metropolitan groups that belong. The Croatian Fraternal Union, based in Pittsburgh, has always been our biggest supporter and our #1 supporter from the get-go. Brother Bernard Lukatic was 100% behind having a Croatian American group nationwide that could be a leading advocate for the Croatian American community in the nation's capital. And so we've built on that. And but I must make one plug. There's 4 of us on the phone that actually were board members of the Croatian Democracy Project from 1988 until 1992, before the NFCA was created. Tony Margan, Dora Plavitic, and Claudia Baratkovic. So the NFCA, working closely with the Croatian Fraternal Union and other groups, really tried to serve in a very diplomatic, humanitarian, public affairs, and educational way, or in many approaches for our community. Over the years, we've branched out and we've become a little more focused on diplomatic and humanitarian and other projects. And I'll just share a few at this point. It just so happens we're the #1 organizational sponsor of Croatia's Special Olympics. We have paintings that were donated to us that are on the wall of the Museum of Arts and Craft in Zagreb, which was unfortunately very damaged. And we just raised $19,500 in the last 3-4 weeks to help with the repairs and the cleanup there at that museum, and a check will be sent their way this week. We're very proud that through all our initiatives, we collaborate, like I said, with the CFU. Newer member the last 4 years is the Association of Croatian American Professionals. We partnered with both those groups and their fundraising efforts over the last 3 weeks. We sent out a newsletter about 3 weeks ago, and it's not even fair to call it a newsletter because it was all about trying to raise money for relief funds. Croatia was hit, and it was a double whammy with the earthquake and, of course, COVID-19. So we are also a key partner with the Croatian Embassy and working with the Croatian Congressional Caucus. We had an event on Capitol Hill last October, showed Nikola Knez's film on Operation Storm, and it was great to be on the Hill for that. And we have 40 Congressional Caucus members that we partner with, including Congressman David Joyce, a Republican from Ohio, and Congresswoman Nanette Berrigan, Democrat from California. So that's been a ongoing caucus initiative since the late 90s. I just want to mention that we've taken a lot of pride in the last 5 years to work with initiatives like 40 Under 40. And I got the idea from Meto, who I think might be on the call today and will be our featured speaker at the next Fireside Chat. So we did a 40 Under 40 in 2016, and again, just here in 2019, we're creating a North American Sports Hall of Fame which will be a lot of fun. And we all know Croatians are crazy about their sports and have so many great athletes. We partnered with a tourism ministry from Croatia last summer and American Airlines for those flights, and the first nonstop flight to Dubrovnik. I was very happy and honored to be on that flight. It's very sad that those flights to Dubrovnik, which would have continued every day this summer from early June to the end of September, have been canceled because of the pandemic. So also we do some interesting projects with, and have supported Bishop Komarica in Bosnia and Herzegovina. We have a number of other events on Capitol Hill, and book parties and wine tastings and all the rest to just help galvanize, and bring our community together. I'm very proud that over the last 28 years, I've worked closely and supported 7 of the 8 U.S. ambassadors to Croatia. I have worked closely with U.S. Ambassador Croatia now, Bob Kohorst, and had 6 or 7 meetings with him, and he's done a great job. Ambassador Kohorst has been laser focused on win-win business development and economic development projects that will benefit both American businesses and Croatian businesses. So that's just a quick update. I try not to talk too fast, just to share kind of the depth and width of some of our initiatives and ongoing programs. And so we have a lot of projects that just kind of fall in our lap, and 80 or 90% of them we embrace just to fill a need, within our Croatian American community.
Sure, and you mentioned how Ambassador Kohorst, he is a businessman. I think that you can see through the ambassadors in the region, the policy that the U.S. has set out. For example, you have a businesswoman as the ambassador to Slovenia. You look down to Montenegro, the ambassador down there, Ambassador Rising Renki. She was in the Foreign Service, but at the Department of Commerce. Whereas then you have career Foreign Service officers in Bosnia, Kosovo, Serbia. And sure, this is great that we have all this business development that can potentially go on between the U.S. and Croatia, but there's one huge issue, and that's the double taxation treaty. So could you just shed light on any new developments with that, and how that will affect American business owners looking to invest in Croatia?
Okay, thanks, Ryan. Great question. And I have, of course, NFCA and Croatian American members almost weekly send notes or ask me about that. I'm sorry to say that the reports out of Munich 5 or 6 weeks ago that said both the visa waiver and the avoidance of double taxation treaty should both be signed by the end of the year wasn't, let's say, completely correct or accurate. And we can talk about the visa waiver later, which has a much higher percentage chance of being approved sooner than later, and possibly by the end of this year. Unfortunately, Croatia is the only EU country that doesn't have the avoidance of a double taxation treaty. And so it has hindered or hurt some of the possible American investments in Croatia. Of course, it also affects and can be detrimental to some of the Croatian companies trying to export. Of course, it's a big concern, and I have a number of Croatian American friends who want to retire in Croatia and are hoping that by the time they do, in 2, 3, 4 years or more, that there will be a treaty signed. The Treasury Department has, in an ongoing fashion, been asking the Republic of Croatia and its government to provide a lot more data. Give us examples of how American businesses are not investing in Croatia because of the lack of a treaty. Also share with us the dollar amounts and the revenues that are brought to Croatia presently through American companies as a factor and as a reason to put a little wind at our back to sign that treaty. However, it's been difficult to put impressive numbers and details on paper because so many American companies, as most of us know, go through European subsidiaries that could be based in London or Brussels or even Slovenia or Vienna. And so those dollars get kind of lost in the shuffle. And I feel I must speak candidly that this is an extremely complicated challenge. And and I don't think that necessarily the numbers and data from a small country like Croatia are going to impress the Department of Treasury. I know a few other countries have been working diligently, like Armenia and others, to also proceed along and to get closer to sign a treaty. First off, Croatia and its discussions with the Department of Treasury, the portfolio has not been opened yet. And we've been told on 2 different occasions there's 50 countries or there's 60 countries ahead of you. And it isn't a list of who contacted the Department of Treasury on a certain date, and then in that chronological order. They're prioritizing them on the size and the volume of their business with the U.S. I think many of the Croatian diplomats who've worked on this project the last few years, of course, are frustrated because the Department of Treasury will allow or set up a meeting every 4 or 5 months, but they do share then a lot of details and specifics of why it doesn't appear like anything is going to happen in the near future. Let me share too that Madam President Kolinda Grabar-Kitarovic, had made this a priority in 2018 and 19, and she was told in Brussels at a NATO meeting and in Warsaw at a 7 Seas meeting with President Trump there, and Secretary of Treasury Mnuchin was there in Warsaw and brought it up, and both the President and the Secretary of Treasury said they'd look into it, they would support it. But unfortunately, it's not that simple. And letters from the Croatian government, including from the President and Minister of Finance, to the White House and the Treasury Department, haven't brought that issue maybe to a priority radar screen with the Department of Treasury. It's fair to say they're not in a hurry and they're not really interested in really signing any new treaties. The Poland DTT treaty was approved by Poland and the Treasury Department 5-6 years ago. And I think some of us who follow the U.S. Congress and Senate know that one U.S. Senator can hold up treaties of this sort, which is kind of hard for many of us to fully understand or comprehend, that one senator can put a hold on a treaty that's already been signed between the Minister of Finance from a country like Poland and the Secretary of Treasury in Washington, D.C. And so I always have to caution and share details that aren't the most positive or promising when it comes to the double taxation treaty. And I think in the end, if there's any hope in the near future, it will be through some political leverage and an opening and an opportunity that presents itself. And Secretary of Treasury Steve Mnuchin agrees to open the portfolio. Let me say too, but without this pandemic, I know Prime Minister Plenković and Finance Minister March were planning to come here to Washington, D.C. and the nation's capital in May or June, while Croatia was still sitting in the EU Council's presidency seat. So that was part of the plan, and to get face-to-face, and maybe not with the president, but the vice president and the Secretary of Treasurer, or David Kottner, who's high level at the Treasury Department, could have been a breakthrough opportunity, and unfortunately, that visit is gone with the pandemic wind.
Yeah, and this pandemic has been affecting a lot in Croatia. One of the major industries coming from Croatia is tourism. In 2019, there were 21 million tourists that logged into the visitor system. It accounted for nearly 20% of GDP, according to the CIA World Factbook. And Croatia has, 8 UNESCO sites, nearly 1,300 islands, and an abundance of coastline. So what can be done to help stem the economic impact of the coronavirus, particularly in the tourism industry?
Okay, great question. And the estimation and projections from the Minister of Tourism, Gary Capelli, a couple of weeks ago was that they were hoping to garner 30% of their revenues on tourism this summer versus 2019. And I must say that I'm guardedly optimistic that we might see Croatia surprise a lot of folks around the world, that maybe they can salvage and bring that number up to 40% or 50%. And let me tell you why I'm bullish about that. If you look at last year, and you cited last summer and the monies generated, 10 million of the 20 million guests to Croatia last year came in July and August. We'll get into maybe a little later some of the successes and the great job Croatia has done managing COVID-19. So if you look at recent surveys, I read another one that came out of Hungary today. Croatia's neighbors, from Slovenia to Austria to the Czech Republic to Hungary now, Germany, and I guess the Czech Republic again. All those neighboring countries, when they look at where they want to go if they leave the country for their summer vacation, you know, you'll see 28%, 35, 40% from Slovenia or Hungary or Austria saying, if we go out of the country, we're going to Croatia. And keep in mind, they can jump in a car and drive to Croatia. So you're not dealing with any of those flight issues or problems. Even though Croatia's EU presidency has been marginalized or complicated by the pandemic, and most of those 800 meetings that were supposed to happen, 500 in Brussels and 300 in Zagreb, have been canceled. You still have like Minister Capelli doing a video conference, planning, recommending a recovery fund for tourism because of the losses. And so Croatia still has been able to play a leadership or have a leadership position dealing with some of these really pressing issues because of their role in the EU presidency. So I think Croatia will do a lot better than a lot of travel analysts believe, because of, I think, the numbers that will come to Croatia to see that beautiful Adriatic Sea like I had hoped to see this summer. And as an American, we'll have to postpone a bit. And so I think we'll see some very surprising and positive numbers in July, August, and September. Also, and just since we mentioned it, you know, because of Croatia's success managing COVID-19 and looking at the numbers here, there's roughly about 2,100 COVID-19 cases and 80 deaths. And they peaked around April 2nd. So that's why you've seen what Prime Minister Plenković announced a couple of weeks ago, this phases that from April 27th to May 4th to May 11th are starting to allow more public transportation and very strategic reopening of stores and businesses and the like. Minister Capelli on the tourism front is already working bilaterally with Austria and Slovenia and other countries to create logistical travel corridors. And they kind of joke about having a COVID-19 passport now. Hopefully that won't be necessary, but I think Croatia will be a good neighbor and try and roll out the red carpet as much as they can for their neighbors to share their beautiful coastline.
Excellent. I know that we're all looking forward to that. So speaking of all these webinars that are going on and meetings through the Croatian EU presidency, one that's coming up this week, I believe, is the virtual Western Balkans Summit. Now, Croatia was admitted into the EU back in 2013. You see a lot of its eastern and southern neighbors looking to join the EU. So what do you think we can expect from this Western Balkans Summit, and how can Croatia really lead the Western Balkans into successfully joining the EU?
Well, great question, Ryan. And yes, the Western Balkan Summit, which was supposed to occur with all these foreign ministers, of course, traveling to Zagreb to discuss all these pressing issues from border security to EU membership and all the rest, was turned into another video webinar, which I hope to view on Wednesday too. Republic of Croatia, I mean, does relish and is embracing its strategic role in the region as you know, being the only NATO EU country that's in what used to constitute Yugoslavia. And sometimes when I mention that word, it's only to be paraphrased as ex-Yugoslavia, but from the former republics of that entity, Republic of Croatia has been able to become a true ally of the U.S. through NATO. And as we talk today, you know, sits in the EU Council presidency seat. And so they have a very serious diplomatic and political role that they need to play in the region. And I think Foreign Minister Radman has gone the extra mile to meet with the leaders in Sarajevo and even from Belgrade and Kosovo, I think, and has met with some Macedonian diplomats earlier this year. So the EU clearly wants to create pathways for Bosnia-Herzegovina and the other countries serious about applying for the EU. And it just transcends the EU membership too. So there's a lot of, like I said, border security, military issues, you know, and even though there might be some very serious political issues in Bosnia-Herzegovina, I even know some of my Croatian friends in the Bosnia-Herzegovina military are still closely cooperating and partnering with NATO as part of MAP and some other requirements that they embraced and are pursuing over this time. I also do want to say, just to backtrack a bit, the NFCA, we're very proud of the work we did to support Croatia's ascension into NATO. You know, for us, it was like a 10-year project. We used to have a 501c4, the NFCA. Now we're a 501c3 with our cultural foundation. And so we did a little more work on Capitol Hill. And even in 2004 and 2008, we passed congressional resolutions. They were always bipartisan resolutions, both Republicans and Democrats supporting Republic of Croatia's bid to be in NATO. And they saw that as a great stabilizing factor or reality for the region. U.S. Ambassador Bob Bradke did a magnificent job as a diplomatic maestro to make sure Croatia was able to join and get the green light with Albania back in late 2008. And it was an election year and very complicated, but a lot of folks on both sides of the aisle came together. So again, I know so many of our Croatian diplomats and European foreign ministers, you know, see the Western Balkans as a region that they've got to make it more of a priority, and they have to continue a serious dialogue about what's it going to take to be a member of NATO or the EU or Council of Europe. And so this Western Balkan Summit, which could have been more of a serious 2-day in-person affair, will take place this Wednesday to make the most of a situation, again, affected by COVID-19.
Sure. And speaking of Croatia's NATO ascension, this is something that was obviously huge for the region, and we've seen many other countries follow suit. Montenegro joined when in 2018. Macedonia recently joined. So for me, when I'm looking at this, it's a NATO member, solid partner with the U.S. What was the reasoning behind the F-16 acquisition from Israel that were U.S.-made F-16s? Why was that blocked? Why didn't that just go through? You know, you'd imagine that Croatia being a NATO ally, that would be a no-brainer for it to go through.
Right, and I'm not an expert on that issue, but I know the devil's in the details, and there was some proprietary rights to electronics and intelligence based technical equipment that was in the Israeli fighter jets that actually were, I think, property of the U.S. company. And so there were some side issues, from what I've heard, that really complicated it. And Israel couldn't get 100% green light from a few of the partners with some of the technology that they had purchased and placed in their fighter jets that made a problem. Now, I see my good friend, Ambassador Peter Galbraith, the first ambassador of the U.S. From the U.S. to Croatia, has his hand politely raised. And is there any way, Ryan, we can let Ambassador Galbraith bring up a question or a comment?
Of course. So, Ambassador Galbraith, you are unmuted.
Well, first, I'm just delighted to participate in this presentation. And when you are talking about visa waivers and double taxation issues between the U.S. and Croatia, it's certainly a very far cry from the issues that I dealt with back from 93 to 98. And above all, it's a sign of how Croatia has become a very normal country with a kind of normal relationship with the United States. And Steve, I'm sorry to say just how long it's been since you founded the organization, and we're so involved in that absolutely critical period for Croatia and for U.S. Croatia relations. I wanted to ask you a question. There's an election in the United States this year, and I refer to him as Senator Biden, because back in those days, he was very engaged, probably more than any member of Congress. He was the chairman of the European Affairs Subcommittee. He made a number of trips to Bosnia and Croatia. He was key in bringing around the policy that, of course, I was working for on the inside, of a more active U.S. involvement that, in fact, successfully brought the war to an end in 1995. Now, as we look to 2020, do you see any issues that might be part of the presidential campaign that relate to Croatia or the Western Balkans? And do you see any differences between the current administration and what a Biden administration might do?
Well, great question. And let me first say that the NFCA is nonpartisan, and so as an organization, we don't take sides, whether it's in a political campaign in the U.S. or in the Republic of Croatia. Let me first say that, yes, Senator Biden and many other Democratic, Republican senators, there are probably 8 or 10, including John McCain and a few others, that were key with pushing, promoting, supporting Croatia's ascension into NATO back in 2008. And as you alluded to, Senator Biden actually became the vice presidential candidate. And so he handed off his Senate Foreign Relations Committee to his friend Chris Dodd, and they had hearings, and President George W. Bush was 100% supportive of Croatia's bid for NATO. And so it was pushed forward. If we jump ahead to 2020 here and we look at the significance or the role of NATO, I mean, I think even though there's been some statements out of the administration that are fuzzy or less supportive, I do believe that without a doubt, it's a bipartisan movement or bipartisan support. If you look from the Foreign Relations Committee, whether it's Senator Ron Johnson or Senator Murphy, the Democrat, they are working side by side and show a lot of support for NATO at key junctures. And I think that whole NATO membership and what it means to be involved in multilateral entities from a Euro-Atlantic perspective and working with our allies, I mean, I think that that issue will surface, and Croatia is not, on the front burner and being a pressing priority issue like it was in the 1990s and when you were ambassador. When you look at of all the issues dealing with the Mideast and the Ukraine and Russia and all the rest, it puts Southeastern Europe in a different category. And as you alluded to, there's a lot of stability, and Croatia has come such a long way since they declared their independence in June of 1991. And I salute all your efforts, Ambassador Galbraith, as the first U.S. ambassador to Croatia, and your role with the Erdut Agreement and even the Dayton Peace Accord to help stop the bloodshed in nearby Bosnia and Herzegovina.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So just a reminder, if you want to ask a question, just raise your hand and we will get to those, okay? So one more question for you, Steve, for me, before we switch it over to the participants. The visa waiver, that's also a huge topic. The US and the EU obviously have very strong relations, but Croatia is one of a few EU countries that does not have a visa waiver to the US. Can you shed some light on what updates you've heard, or when that can be expected to be completed?
Okay. It is correct that as of February of this year, it looked very promising, and I would have said 90% or better, that by the deadline of September 30th, Croatia would have reached that milestone of having less than 3% of visas being rejected. They were making more progress in the last few years than any other country. I think many on the call here might have heard that Poland finally hit that landmark number and got a green light, you know, from the White House and Department of Homeland Security. It also must be mentioned, though, and you know, I've talked with Ambassador Kohorst and the State Department about it, and they've been very, very praising and positive about the role of the Republic of Croatia and what the Interior Ministry, Minister Davor Bozinovic, who was in DC in December, and all the work they're doing to start the finalization of protocol and documents that are also required as part of that visa waiver project. So I've been told by a few sources, both in Zagreb and DC, that there was a lot of collaboration between the Department of Homeland Security and Croatia's Interior Ministry, and that they really felt that with a serious 5-6 month focus, that all this documentation would be completed by August or September, and before September 30th. However, having said that, and again with this pandemic development, it may not affect getting below 3% on the visa waiver rejections. However, it might complicate the Republic of Croatia finishing a lot of this necessary requirements for visa waiver that the Department of Homeland Security requires. I know that the Ministry of Interior and other Croatian officials, and even Ambassador Shimonovic, we're going to continue that work and focus, and hopefully, even without these face-to-face meetings, that process, which was in serious motion as of February, will continue. And it would be rather exciting to know by the end of September that Croatia has jumped through all the hoops and that the visa waiver initiative will have been successful, and somebody in the administration in October announcing that Croatia has qualified and got in all that necessary documentation and VPW requirements.
Well, I hope that that comes sooner rather than later. Hopefully that they can get back to work on that when all this COVID-19 stuff dies down. So we have somebody who has their hand raised as an iPad. So I will unmute you, but could you please say who you are, who you're affiliated with, and the floor is yours.
Hello.
Oh, yep, we can hear you.
Oh, excellent. Right, my name is Juliana Zovko. I'm a member of European Parliament, and I just wanted to say greet Mr. Rukavina, and to say how I appreciate this this conversation. And I was also interested into NFCA role at this moment in dealing with peace and security issues in Western Balkan as well, and the American involvement at this moment. Mr. Galbraith, Ambassador Galbraith, mentioned this issue as well, so it was very interesting to hear the opinion of Mr. Rukavina, and as well on the fact that Croatia has given 1,100,000 Croatian citizenship during the war in former Yugoslavia and Bosnia and Herzegovina, to all the citizens, that some of them are having these issues with visa problems. So maybe if Steve can explain us a bit more how much Croatian American Croats are involved in dealing with these issues, because we are seeing all these questions being open, and on the eve of the campaign for the American presidential elections, what will Croatian position will be, because you were quite outspoken. Thank you.
Thanks. Okay. I should point out that we've had an ongoing discussion with the U.S. State Department about issues involving Bosnia and Herzegovina. We were very involved with issues in Brčko from the very get-go, going back to Embarrass Farron and Stuart Seldowitz and Croatians from that region, Tomislav Antunovic and Mio Anic. And, we attempted, and we have had 4 or 5 meetings with American diplomats in the last 3 years discussing ways we felt, or asked their opinion on different ways the U.S. could maybe show some leadership to help modernize the Dayton Peace Accord, to deal with some electoral issues. As anyone who follows Bosnia and Herzegovina knows, that the Dayton Peace Accord, which stopped the war and stopped the bloodshed, was never meant to be a long-term constitutional agreement for the country. We don't have, the NFCA, we don't have an official position right now, but there are a lot of options from creating what would be more like a Belgium or Switzerland with cantons and different electoral districts that would create more of a federal entity in Bosnia and Herzegovina that would transcend the 2 entities that exist today. And it's fair to say that Bosnian Croatians, whether you're in Republika Srpska or the Federation, feel like second-class citizens. And there has to be, hopefully, a modernizing of the Dayton Peace Accord that deals with these issues. And, and it just isn't resolved by one man, one vote. And you also have the DPA that has given 49% to the Republika Srpska. And so it's not easy, and it's heavy lifting. And when we talk to American diplomats, of course, we understand from what we're hearing that, it's beyond complicated, and it's very difficult to get the European Union to want to make Bosnia and Herzegovina a priority to deal with some of these very real issues that I know better from a Croat perspective. I think you mentioned, and so many Bosnian Croats, because they're Croatian citizens too, have left, and with their EU passport have been able to go to Croatia or Austria or elsewhere, and so that's hurt the makeup and some of the essence of Bosnia and Herzegovina. We're close to submitting a proposal that would go to 3 cities in Bosnia and Herzegovina, Mostar, Bihać, and Banja Luka, to just work with all ethnic communities to talk about how do you create businesses. So we were very, very much involved in discussing electoral districts back 2 years ago when they were approaching new elections. And again, we felt that there were going to be some aberrations or problems coming out of the last elections, which still exist and are keeping the Federation back and the national government from any kind of unified, I think, productive government. And just functionality still rules the day with so many layers of bureaucrats and ministers within Bosnia and Herzegovina. And as you know, how many countries have 5 presidents? And that should tell you what is part of the problem, and share more explicitly why there's a need for some constitutional reorganizing within Croatia's neighbor, Bosnia and Herzegovina.
Excellent. So our next question is coming from somebody you know very well, Joe Foley. So Joe, you are unmuted.
Thanks today to you, Ryan, and Balkan Insider for hosting these inaugural webinars this month with the leaders of the diaspora community here in the U.S. Well done. Thank you.
Thank you.
Steve, you mentioned that 15 years ago, NFCA was instrumental in creating and passing legislation that highlighted for the U.S. Congress that the Republic of Croatia was ready for full NATO member state status. I think it was April of 2009 when they achieved full status in NATO. Considering Croatia's presidency of the EU this year, how else do you see Croatia acting politically as a leader in its South Central European neighborhood?
Right. So again, I mean, I just think it's a huge feather in Croatia's cap to be in NATO and to be such an important ally within that Euro-Atlantic entity, and again, such a key ally with the United States of America. Quite frankly, I think the U.S. has looked to Croatia to show leadership with its neighbors in the capital of Sarajevo, even up to Belgrade and around the region. I think there's been some business development achievements and cooperation that's building some momentum, and Croatia still, I think, exports as much to the east as it does within the European Union, and so those business relationships, are still so important. And I mean, I think it will be very interesting for a lot of us to analyze some of the benefits of the EU presidency for Croatia. Like I said, even though they've been, hampered a bit by the pandemic and turned all those meetings into video webinars and video conferences. But I'm quite proud, and Ambassador Galbraith mentioned how far Croatia has come really in the last 28 or 29 years. I encourage Croatian diplomats who I know and I talk to all the time about continuing their efforts to really bring some vision and leadership to the region. And I think they've shown that in many ways. I'm sorry that Prime Minister Plenković and others could not visit Washington, D.C. this May or June to, continue a closer dialogue with the U.S. And the Defense Department, Department of Homeland Security, the Treasury Department, the White House. Again, but that's all an offshoot of Croatia being part of NATO and being, part of that club, which is a huge accomplishment and something that we're very proud of because we worked on it for a good 10 years.
Excellent. Our next question, I think we have time for about three more questions. So our next question is coming from Anthony Margan. Anthony, you are unmuted.
Steve and Ryan, thank you. So my question has to do more with business investment. In the last 20 years, we see Russia investing billions of dollars in Serbia and Republic of Srpska. We know the Chinese government is now investing a lot of money in the region, especially with the building Belfast Bridge connection down near Dubrovnik. Steve, what can America do? What can the United States do to increase our investment footprint in Croatia and in Bosnia? I know there's been a few small success stories here and there, like, for example, this shipyard in Rijeka, Victor Lennox, has been the recipient of over $100 million in contracts from the U.S. Navy and Naples for major repair overhauls. So that's a real success story. But that's a real isolated case. What can we do? What can the NFCA do? What can Americans do to encourage more U.S. investment? Because we run the risk of being overrun by the Chinese and Russians over there.
Right. Well, great question and ongoing challenge. And again, I want to salute all the efforts by Ambassador Kohlhorst because he's just been so focused on every business opportunity within the Republic of Croatia that any Americans would have interest in. And again, we've already mentioned how without an avoidance of double taxation treaty, an American company that could be a huge VC, that for them to invest 10 million or 100 million or more in a Croatian project, even like the floating LNG terminal, without that DTT treaty, certain companies just decided to walk away and not explore options or business opportunities in Croatia. Ambassador Kohlhorst has had multiple meetings with some of the larger American companies, and there was just a business delegation in October at General Dynamics, and 10 of America's Fortune 500 companies coming there. And so it hasn't been real successful from an American invest in Croatia perspective. You know, Croatia has tried to have a positive working relationship with China and Russia, all the neighbors from Eastern and Central Europe. And I think, you know, the numbers show that, you know, Croatia has a very healthy, positive business relationship, both export and import wise, with Germany and, of course, Austria and Hungary and such. You know, again, I think from a Croatian American perspective, we're always challenging our Croatian American diplomatic friends to figure out ways to be a little more business friendly, make it maybe a little easier for anyone to invest in Croatia. And we know a lot of our Croatian American friends over the years have attempted to do that in different ways, and it wasn't so simple, and they lost some of their patience or focus. You mentioned the Chinese, and I understand the Chinese workers are back, you know, building that bridge from mainland over to Pelješac. And I think we all have read about the Chinese and some of their efforts to kind of like build another Silk Road from Asia back into Europe. And so they're making efforts all over Europe, and especially even in Africa, as part of their foreign policy business development plans. But, you know, I wish there was more we can do. I was involved with a group, and there's some of us that were looking to do a investment tech symposium in Croatia this fall, where we could feature 15 to 20 startups in Croatia. Have a friend who is very well wired to VCs and investment or investors that play in the big leagues in Europe. And they were excited about coming to Zagreb. And I hope a lot of initiatives like that and others that are bringing in potential investors to help Croatian companies or startups, that those efforts and initiatives will continue after this pandemic and aren't all postponed and, you know, put on the back burner until next year.
Good. We always hope for more U.S. investment around the world. So the next question goes to Philip Berquist. Philip, you are unmuted.
Great job, guys. My name is Phil Berquist. I'm the honorary consul in Houston, state of Texas. And I was wondering if you could give us a quick update on the LNG terminal in Kirk and what is going on there. And also, have there been any plans, probably difficult to answer with COVID, but for the General Assembly in September? Thanks.
Okay. Yes, Honorary Consul Berquist, good to hear your voice.
Thank
Saw you at the Army Navy Club a few years ago. And just so our audience understands, the EU has committed 115 million US dollars to this floating LNG terminal near Kirk. Croatian government has committed 113 million, roughly about the same, and there'll be a direct equity of 36 million. So that project is moving forward, even though they haven't gotten the commitments, and unfortunately none from the U.S., Honorary Consul Berquist, you know, for some of the natural gas and to really be directly involved in this LNG terminal. But it is a strategic priority for the Croatian government, and it's Minister Tomislav Ćorić, who I think visited there 6 or 7 weeks ago, and there's been some ongoing work there that will allow the floating LNG terminal that has been purchased and is on its way to Croatia to be operational by, I heard, mid-year 2021. So I think, in speaking to some energy friends of mine, that it's still going to be a tough challenge to make it as functional and operative and profitable within the first few years. I think a lot of us know that Hungary will play a key role, and hopefully Croatia work out some issues with Hungary so that they become really a serious partner, you know, to make this floating LNG terminal successful in the short and long term. When it comes to the parliamentary elections that you asked about, they were supposed to happen in September, and there's been a lot of rumors in the last week that they could occur as soon as July. And as we all know who follow Croatia, it's always an interesting coalition that gets elected. And usually there isn't a solid majority for one party or another. So a lot of the smaller parties play a big role in trying to figure out what that majority will be.
Excellent. And our last and final question comes from Mark Plavitic. Mark, you are unmuted.
All right. Hey, Steve, Ryan, great job, guys. This is a very informative meeting. So I am Mark Plavitic. I'm a 2020 Rudy Perpich Fellow for the National Federation of Croatian Americans Cultural Foundation. And my question really relates to tourism and how COVID-19 is affecting the Croatian government, their tourism sector. So, I mean, at least like 20% of Croatia's GDP depends on tourism. And since the COVID-19 cases are really preventing people from visiting Croatia, it's making a huge detrimental impact on their income. So I just wanted to make, so I just was wondering, what are certain measures that the Croatian government and their international organizations are doing in order to repair the financial burdens in the tourism sector?
Right. Well, Mark, good question. And as we discussed a little earlier, I'm very positive that Croatia might still be able to salvage 40 or 50% of their tourism dollars versus last year. And again, because of their success managing COVID-19, I mean, they're already taking down that makeshift hospital in Zagreb. I think all their neighbors will hear by the end of May that Minister Capelli and the Croatian government really have a safe strategic plan to create those travel corridors to bring all those neighboring nationalities through Croatia to the Adriatic coast. I mean, I think too, Croatia has shown some leadership to put a focus on how the EU has to support countries like Croatia, because I think it's roughly about 10% of the GDP of EU is based on tourism dollars. So I do think Croatia will continue to show some fancy footwork and roll, like I said, to roll out the red carpet with all these travel corridors. They're going to give discounts to their in-country residents too, to take a vacation on the coast. And so it's sad if some of us Croatian Americans can't get there this summer, but again, we do hope that they go way beyond the 30% that's now projected of what they expect to bring in from tourism. So.
Good, yeah, and we all hope to get back to those beaches soon enough. So Steve, I'd like to thank you for taking time out of your day to sit and chat with Balkan Insider and myself, basically about what everything's going on in Croatia with Croatian Americans and whatnot. So for those of you that are listening now, this Thursday we will be hosting another Fireside Q&A with United Macedonian Diaspora President Medo Koloski. And next Monday, we will be having a conversation with the President of the Advisory Council for Bosnia and Herzegovina, Ayla Delkic. So Steve, again, thank you so much for joining us, and it's been very insightful.
Thank you, Ryan. Appreciate it. Thanks.